The little girl was standing barefoot on the front porch, clutching a stuffed rabbit against her chest, when the black luxury car stopped in front of the tiny rented house. The engine went silent. The driver's door opened slowly. And the woman who stepped out looked nothing like the cold-hearted CEO everyone feared at the office. Her mascara was smeared from crying, her hands trembled uncontrollably, and her expensive heels sank slightly into the wet grass as if even the earth could feel the weight she carried that morning. 3 days earlier, she had looked directly into the eyes of the single father she had humiliated and warned him with icy hatred, "Stay out of my life." But now, she was standing at his door in tears, begging for the very thing she once destroyed. Before we begin this emotional story, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel, Wisdom Story House, if you believe kindness and second chances can change someone's life forever. Your support helps these meaningful stories reach more hearts around the world. The sun had barely risen over the city when Rowan Mercer unlocked the doors of the downtown cafe where he worked mornings before heading to his second job. The early daylight spilled softly across the empty sidewalks, painting the quiet streets in gold. Rowan moved slowly, exhaustion hanging from his shoulders like a heavy coat. At 36 years old, he looked older than he really was. Sleepless nights, overdue bills, and years of carrying life alone had left faint shadows beneath his eyes. But every morning, before the stress swallowed him whole, there was one thing that kept him going. His daughter. 6-year-old Ivy sat near the cafe window coloring pictures while humming softly to herself. Her curly hair bounced every time she smiled, and somehow, even after all the hardships they faced, she still believed the world was beautiful. Rowan often wondered how children managed to protect light inside themselves even when surrounded by darkness. Years earlier, Rowan's wife had died suddenly from a heart condition nobody knew she had. One ordinary afternoon had shattered everything. Since then, Rowan had raised Ivy alone, balancing jobs, skipping meals, and sacrificing every dream he once carried just to make sure his little girl never felt abandoned. He never complained. Not once. But loneliness had become part of him. Around noon, Rowan rushed across the city toward his second job at Vale and Crest Holdings, one of the largest development companies in the state. He worked there as a maintenance supervisor, fixing electrical systems and handling repairs inside the towering corporate building. The employees barely noticed him most days. To them, he was invisible. Except for Celestine Vale. Celestine was the company's CEO. Powerful. Brilliant. Feared. Her name alone could silence entire conference rooms. She was known for making ruthless decisions without hesitation. Employees whispered stories about how she fired executives without blinking and buried competitors without mercy. To the public, she was untouchable perfection wrapped in elegance and cold ambition. The first time Celestine noticed Rowan was during a company charity event held in the building lobby. Ivy had accompanied him because her babysitter canceled unexpectedly. While wealthy investors mingled under sparkling chandeliers, Ivy wandered toward a decorative fountain and accidentally spilled juice across Celestine's designer shoes. The entire room froze. Everyone expected anger. But before Celestine could react, Rowan stepped forward instantly, apologizing while trying to clean the mess with trembling hands. Ivy looked terrified, her tiny lip quivering. Then something unexpected happened. Celestine stared at Ivy for several long seconds. Something shifted briefly in her expression. A flicker of pain. Almost invisible. Then her cold mask returned. "It's fine," she said quietly before walking away. But from that day forward, she started noticing Rowan everywhere. She noticed how he skipped lunch to buy snacks for his daughter. She noticed how Ivy waited patiently in the lobby after school, drawing pictures while Rowan worked overtime. She noticed how he smiled at everyone despite carrying exhaustion in his bones. And slowly, against her will, something inside her began to soften. Celestine's own life was a carefully constructed prison. Years earlier, she had lost her younger sister during a tragic accident she blamed herself for. Since then, she had buried every emotion beneath work, wealth, and control. Love became weakness. Attachment became danger. Distance became survival. Yet every time she saw Rowan and Ivy together, she felt something painful awakening inside her chest. One rainy afternoon, the building elevators malfunctioned, trapping Celestine between floors for nearly 40 minutes. Panic overtook her. Claustrophobia tightened around her throat as memories of the accident flooded back. Her breathing spiraled out of control. It was Rowan who pried the elevator doors open. And when he found her curled against the wall struggling to breathe, he didn't look at her like a CEO. He looked at her like a human being. He stayed beside her quietly until her shaking stopped. No judgment. No fear. Just calm kindness. That moment terrified Celestine more than anything else. Because for the first time in years, she felt safe. Over the following weeks, small conversations began appearing between them like sunlight breaking through cracks. Morning greetings. Shared coffee. Brief talks about Ivy's school drawings. Rowan never treated Celestine differently because of her money or status, and that confused her deeply. Everyone else wanted something from her. Respect. Promotion. Influence. Rowan wanted nothing. And perhaps that was why she slowly started wanting him near. But happiness has a cruel way of arriving right before disaster. One afternoon, Celestine overheard two board members gossiping in the hallway. They were mocking her growing attachment to the maintenance guy with a child. They warned that emotional weakness could damage investor confidence. They hinted that tabloids would destroy her reputation. Old fears consumed her instantly. That evening, Rowan found himself unexpectedly called into her office. The city skyline glowed behind her massive windows as sunset painted the room orange. But Celestine's expression was cold again. Distant. Hardened. She didn't invite him to sit. Instead, she spoke with brutal sharpness. She told him their interactions had become inappropriate. She said employees were talking. She accused him of becoming too comfortable around her. Rowan stood there silently, confusion filling his face. Then came the words that shattered everything. Stay out of my life. The sentence struck harder than shouting ever could. Rowan nodded once, quietly, because dignity was the only thing he still had left. Then he walked away without defending himself. That night, Ivy noticed her father sitting alone on the porch long after dark. You're sad, she whispered gently. Rowan forced a smile. Sometimes adults make mistakes. But inside, something had broken. Over the next few days, Rowan avoided Celestine completely. He requested transfers to different floors. He kept conversations brief. The warmth that once existed disappeared entirely. And strangely, the emptiness that followed became unbearable for Celestine. The office felt colder. The hallways felt silent. Even success felt meaningless. Then, on a bright Saturday morning, her world collapsed. Celestine received a call from the hospital informing her that her father had suffered a massive stroke. She rushed there immediately, panic consuming every thought. Her father had been the only family she had left after her sister's death. But when she arrived, the doctors explained the truth gently. He had signed a do not resuscitate order months earlier. And before losing consciousness, he left a message specifically for her. A nurse handed her a small envelope. Inside was an old photograph. It showed Celestine as a little girl beside her sister, both laughing while covered in paint during a summer afternoon long forgotten. On the back, her father had written shaky words. Don't spend your whole life punishing yourself for surviving. For the first time in years, Celestine completely fell apart. All the walls she spent years building crumbled at once. The grief she buried. The guilt. The loneliness. The fear of attachment. Everything erupted inside her like a storm she could no longer control. And in that moment of unbearable pain, there was only one person she wanted to see. Rowan. Not because he was powerful. Not because he could fix things. But because when she was near him, she remembered what kindness felt like. So on that gray afternoon, she drove across town until she reached the small house where Rowan lived with Ivy. And now she stood there trembling on his porch. When Rowan opened the door, shock crossed his face instantly. He had never seen Celestine look fragile before. The powerful CEO standing in front of him looked lost, almost broken. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Then tears spilled down her face uncontrollably. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered weakly. The honesty in her voice pierced straight through him. For a moment, Rowan remembered every painful word she had said. Every humiliation. Every sleepless night afterward. But then he looked at her carefully and realized something heartbreaking. She wasn't asking for forgiveness because she was lonely. She was asking because she was drowning. Before Rowan could respond, little Ivy appeared behind him holding her stuffed rabbit. She stared up at Celestine innocently for a moment before stepping forward and wrapping tiny arms around her waist. Children have a strange ability to sense pain adults try to hide. Celestine collapsed emotionally the second Ivy hugged her. Years of buried sorrow poured out through uncontrollable sobbing. And standing there in the fading daylight, surrounded by silence and rain-soaked air, she finally allowed herself to grieve everything she had lost. Rowan slowly guided her inside. No judgment. No revenge. Just compassion. The weeks that followed changed all their lives forever. Celestine began visiting often, not as a CEO, but simply as a woman learning how to live again. She helped Ivy with school projects. She sat beside Rowan during quiet evenings on the porch. She laughed for the first time in years. And slowly, Rowan saw the real person hidden beneath her armor. Not coldness. Not arrogance. Just someone deeply wounded. One evening, while sunlight poured warmly through the kitchen windows, Celestine admitted the truth she had hidden for years. She told Rowan she pushed people away because she believed loving someone meant eventually losing them. She thought distance would protect her from pain. But all it did was leave her alone. Rowan listened quietly before telling her something simple that stayed with her forever. Love isn't about avoiding loss. It's about choosing connection even when life scares you. Months later, Celestine shocked the corporate world by stepping down temporarily as CEO to rebuild her life outside endless ambition. Headlines spread everywhere, but for once, she didn't care what people thought. Because every morning now began with something far more valuable than success. It began with peace. One bright daytime afternoon, Rowan stood in the park watching Ivy run across the grass while laughing uncontrollably. Nearby, Celestine sat on a bench smiling softly beneath the sunlight. No luxury office. No cold walls. No masks. Just a family stitched together by second chances. And for the first time in years, none of them felt alone anymore. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House. Stories like this remind us that kindness can heal wounds even time cannot fix. And before this story ends, write in the comments, second chances can save lives. Because sometimes the people who push others away the hardest are the ones silently begging not to be abandoned. In the end, Celestine learned something no amount of wealth could ever teach her. Human hearts are not meant to survive in isolation. They are meant to break, heal, forgive, and love again despite the risks. And Rowan discovered that even after unbearable loss, life still finds ways to surprise broken people with unexpected hope. As the golden evening sunlight stretched across the park and Ivy's laughter echoed through the warm air, the future no longer felt frightening. For the first time, it felt possible.